Welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofit leadership and sustainability, where the passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact are celebrated. With your host, Jarrett Ransom, get ready to explore inspiring stories and game changing strategies of nonprofit leaders from across the sector. In this season, we're focusing on critical management challenges that are key to the long-term success of nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense, in-depth conversations with the real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and learn how to navigate and overcome the challenges that help build stronger, more sustainable organizations. Now, let's dive in and harness the collective power of our nonprofit networks to create lasting change.
Welcome back, my fellow nonprofit nerds. Today, I'm excited to welcome Heather Burright to the podcast. She is based in the greater Chicago area, but she helps nonprofits and nonprofit leaders across the world. She's dedicated to helping nonprofits strengthen their teams and scale their impact, which I know is something we all need right now. She talks a little bit about listening cycles. What can we not sacrifice, which is a phenomenal question. And she talks about the need for having strong leaders today to help us navigate uncertain times. So have a listen to Heather Burright. But before we dive in, a big shout out to this season's sponsors, Bloomerang and Chazen. Thank you for your support and making these conversations possible. Well, hello, Heather. I am so thrilled to have you. And for everyone listening, first of all, thank you. Thanks for tuning in. Thrilled to have with us today, Heather Burright. She joins us from the greater Chicago area, where she's at Skill Masters Market, LLC. And she's going to drop some teasers because I also want you to check out her podcast, Learning for Good podcast. Heather helps nonprofits and she strengthens their team. She helps to scale their impact to drive real behavior change and improve their performance. So Heather, welcome.
Hey, Jarrett, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. And, this is a lot of fun because I was recently on your podcast and here I am turning the tables, having you as a guest on mine, because truthfully, we just have so much to talk about.
It's true. I think we both, value the people that are driving our nonprofits, and whether that's staff or volunteers. And it's so important to just invest in them and build them up. And so I think we just have a lot in common there and have some great conversations because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive right in, because when we think of nonprofits, and as you said, we value the leaders in our sector, and I use leaders broadly because I believe we're all a leader. We're struggling right now. I know I am, I know my peers are, we're really in uncertain times. So as we dive into really this broad conversation, leadership, sustainability, I'm curious what leadership and sustainability look like today in light of our current state of affairs and what you're seeing in the landscape.
Yeah. I'm coming at this probably a little bit differently than some of your other guests will, being in kind of the people development space. But to me, leadership and sustainability in the sector has to include talent retention, and it has to include continued program impact. And I don't say that lightly. I recognize that we're headed potentially for another disruption to nonprofit, specifically nonprofit staffing, with layoffs that are starting to happen and may continue to happen, and that our programs and services across the sector might be experiencing a lot of change in the future as well. But this is not new to our sector. I think change is a constant for us. And so to make sure that we're continuing to invest in our people so that we're able to retain them as much as we can, and that we're able to continue our program impact, that has to be a part of our conversation when we think about leadership and sustainability. I think two big things that we need to be thinking about that impact our ability to retain talent and continue making that impact are change fatigue and also change enablement. And, what I mean by that is we you're probably going to at some point make changes to your nonprofit's programs or services, whether it's a strategic change, it's an approach that you're changing, an actual program or service is changing. And when you do that, we have to be thinking about like, how can you actually enable that change rather than just kind of rolling it out? So how can you help your staff or your volunteers make that transition? They're likely going to need new training that aligns with whatever those new expectations are. They're going to need peer support as they're making that change. They may be grieving what was in the midst of the change. They're going to need accountability, and it's important because it's what allows you to maintain quality and consistency in your programs and services in the midst of other changes that can even sometimes feel like crisis.
I love that you called out change fatigue. And this is the first time I've heard it like together like that. I hear compassion fatigue a lot, right? And I experience change fatigue. So thank you for naming that for me. When I come in, certainly as an interim transition leader, often as interim executive director, CEO, the organization itself has already undergone a lot of change. And then I come in and guess what? I also add to that change. So change fatigue is a real thing. And I'm sure many of our listeners are like, that is the thing I'm experiencing, and I don't think that's going to go away because as you said, in our sector, we're constantly changing. So it's probably something that's familiar to our culture, but it doesn't mean that it makes our days easy. So again, just thanks for that. Well, I want to ask also, like, how have you, Heather, helped nonprofits adapt to this change, right? And right now it's changing economic and social landscapes. How do you show up in that space? Because this is a heavy conversation.
Yeah. So as a consultant, I'm coming in and I'm helping a nonprofit scale their program or service without losing impact, or I'm helping them, supporting them through an organizational change by skilling up their people, or maybe helping build out their leadership pipeline and what do they need to do to invest in people to take the leadership role in the future. And one thing I've found is that it's really helpful to put aside any assumptions. Imagine that. And listen. Listening, I think, is foundational to everything that I do and really everything that nonprofits do. So I focus a lot of my time on needs analysis when I'm thinking about how do I help this nonprofit adapt in a particular situation. I want to hear from the project sponsor, who's the person that identified there was a pain point or a challenge that needed to be solved for, and what are their expectations? What are they seeing? What are they hoping for? I want to hear from subject matter experts, specifically, if there's a program or a service that's being changed. I want to hear directly from subject matter experts to hear their experiences. I want to hear from the intended audience for the training or whatever the solution is, because they're the ones living the day to day. And I want to empathize with them and I want to understand what they're experiencing. And I have to balance all of those inputs to make sure that whatever gets created is the right thing for right now. If there's going to be resistance to the change, I need to know that. If there are early adopters, related to the change, I need to know that. And if something's going to potentially disrupt maybe program delivery or something else, I need to know that, because all of these things impact how people receive and respond to change. And I think that's the biggest role that I can play right now is as I'm working with a nonprofit and they're responding to changes and creating change themselves. I can show up, I can listen, I can hear all of those different voices and help to balance those inputs, find those themes, and then help create solutions that really resonate with all the different audiences involved.
I love a good listening tour. That's what I call it, right? And ironically, I went hiking this past weekend and I wore this t-shirt. I was in a leadership program called You and Improved, and they have a communication course. And on the back of the shirt, it says, 2 ears, 1 mouth for a reason, right? Like, let's listen more than we speak. You made me want to ask this question. So again, I love a listening tour. Pardon me. Do you believe that the executive leadership of nonprofits should be continuously doing leadership tours? And I say that because I feel like it's a part of their everyday world. However, should we also make it an intentional practice to like really build that into our calendar, maybe on a quarterly basis, a biannual basis? And then right along with that executive team, Heather, where does the board fit into listening?
Yeah, I would say 100% the executive team needs to be listening all the time. I think it's really easy to make assumptions about how someone is feeling or what they know or what their skill level is for implementing, whatever that change is, why they're motivated or how they're motivated. It's easy to make those assumptions, especially if you've heard from them before, but we're constantly changing. Our perceptions are constantly changing. We're really influenced by other people as well. So, just the kind of social aspect of that, just because I'm okay today, I might talk to someone tomorrow that changes my perspective and I'm not okay anymore. And so I think that continuous cycle of listening is really, really important. I don't know if I have an opinion on how involved the board should be in that process, but I definitely think the executive team needs to be consistently listening to staff. I think, excuse me, I think the board and the executive team definitely need to have their own listening cycle to make sure that they're always aligned. But as far as board and staff, I'm not sure if I have an opinion there.
Yeah, no, that's really great feedback. What about how are you also showing up to help the nonprofits balance the need for their operational efficiency with investing in their professional development? And I love that you brought up in the very beginning talent retention. Like that is something that we always want to keep top of mind. However, I was just on a call where basically the organization is being guided to furlough their employees. So, right. So again, current state of affairs, a lot of financial uncertainty. Organizations, while they might have the best intention to retain their staff, they really could be looking at layoffs or just a complete change of everything. So what does that look like, for you coming in to balance organizations' operational efficiency and investing in that professional development for their staff?
Yeah, I think my answer probably would vary depending on the organization and what they are experiencing uniquely. Um,
Mhm.
so I think when you are facing layoffs, and it does happen, it's important to do so with integrity and transparency. And it's important to think about what messages are being sent to the people who are being furloughed or laid off. And it's important to think about how you're going to support the people who are still there, because they also are probably going to be grieving because they just lost part of their workforce, part of their team members. And now they're going to have more work with fewer people, most likely. So they're also going to be in need of support. And I think it's important to think about those things as well. I'm often working with large federated nonprofits, and when they're thinking about operational efficiency and professional development, they might be facing layoffs, or their local chapters might be facing layoffs. But it's a little bit more of a challenge with operational efficiency and professional development either way, because there's no centralized structure necessarily for professional development. And so what they need is some way to ensure that everyone receives the same quality of training, of professional development. But they also need that local adaptability because each chapter in their network is slightly different. And so whether they're facing layoffs or not, there is this kind of need for operational efficiency that they face that's a little bit different. And one thing I found that's really helpful is identify those things that have to be consistent no matter what. And I think that's true even in times of change. What are the things that you cannot sacrifice to still be you, to still be your nonprofit, your organization? What are those things?
And then, sorry to interrupt. That's a great question. Like, what are the things that you cannot sacrifice?
Yeah, it's a great place to start in times of change, especially when you're looking at changes to your staffing, changes to your programs or services. You know, knowing who you are and what your values are and what those things are that make you you are just, that's critical, because there are things likely that you're doing that you could stop doing or you could pause, but there are things that have to continue.
Yeah.
So if we can identify those things, we can then develop staff to do those things. And then, we can offer wraparound support if we need them to adapt to a local environment, or peer support, supervisor, buy-in and support, coaching, mentoring. The solution might be completely different depending on the organization and their unique situation, their resources, what the change is that's happening. But even the size of the organization, right? Whether they have centralized or decentralized professional development. But I think the solution, right, is really about balancing those needs by really listening and learning what's needed and making sure that whatever gets created is right for right now.
Right for right now. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, sustainability, I believe, has become a little bit of a buzzword, and it's the name of the game, right? Like every organization, anytime I'm leading a facilitation, strategic planning, whatever it is, Heather, they're like, we want to be sustainable. We want to focus on our sustainability. So what does sustainability look like for the organizations you're working with, and how are they defining sustainability, as well as making decisions with a focus on their definition of sustainability? That's a big question, right? All about sustainability. What is that looking like?
Yeah, I feel like the conversations are similar to probably what you hear. They're a little all over the place. Sometimes sustainability is financial focused. Sometimes it is impact focused. Sometimes it is staffing focused. But I think, for me, and where I said, I think it's important that we continue talking about training and we continue talking about leadership development, even during times of uncertainty like this. Those are things that can be quick to get cut from budgets. But it's actually even more important now than ever. If you think about the change fatigue that I mentioned, like your organization needs strong leaders who can help you navigate times of crisis. And so we need to be thinking about who's on your bench, watching, cheering the team on, who's warming up, ready to jump in, right? Who's out in the field, rallying the team, and who's out in the field begging for a water break, right? Like there's a lot going on. And we have to still be thinking about, if we want to be sustainable, we still have to be thinking about training. We still have to be thinking about developing our leaders. We still have to be thinking about how we're supporting them, so that we have the right people who can lead our organization now, but also in the future, because the changes will continue. We're going to continue to evolve as a sector. And so we need people who are ready now to navigate our current situation, but we also need people who are ready in the future.
Yeah. Great response to that. Gosh, I could just talk to you for hours, which is again why you had me on your podcast and now flip the script to have you. I would love for you to share how people can learn more about you, your company, as well as your podcast.
Yeah, I'm probably easiest found on LinkedIn under my name. I also have a private community for nonprofit training and leadership development pros called the Nonprofit L&D Collective. And then you mentioned I have a podcast, Learning for Good. And we spend a lot of time on that podcast talking about how to create training that actually results in behavior change, how to support organization-wide change through training and other solutions for your staff and leadership development as well.
Yeah, definitely check that out. Heather's got some great conversations in there, great tips, great strategies. So before we wrap up, I have one final takeaway request. What is a takeaway you would want other leaders listening to this to know right now?
Yeah. So I think I would go back to the beginning of our conversation. Leadership and sustainability in the sector has to include talent retention, and it has to include continued program impact. We have to stay true to our mission. We have to invest in our people, and we can make strategic shifts without disrupting our impact as long as our people are on board. And so that's why we have to focus on our people.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much, Heather. And thank you for, I'm going to say, it's going to sound woo-woo, but like shining your light truly and making this so that everyone can see just some like really practical, tangible steps, because I know I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, not quite sure where my checklist is to get through the next 30 days, right? If someone has one, I think that would be wonderful. But you're right. We are navigating uncertain times. There's a lot happening. Change fatigue is real. And you've just shared so many great nuggets of insight and information. So thank you, Heather, for sharing your valuable time and your expertise.
Thank you for having me, Jarrett.